The first thing no one wants to admit, yet everyone feels when they hit 40, 50, 60, is that there are nights when the bedroom feels too small to hide the weight of life. And it was on one of those nights, in a small town somewhere in the American heartland, that Michael Parker's soul finally cracked in silence. He didn't see bright lights, didn't hear a voice from heaven, didn't have any dramatic revelation. He just realized, with a sharp and painful clarity, that everything he'd been holding inside had reached the end of the line. The bills stacked up on the kitchen table, the marriage worn thin by routine, the faith that used to burn like fire and now felt like cold smoke. Michael was 47, and he felt like he'd been living on autopilot for so long he'd forgotten what it was like to take a deep breath without feeling guilty. That night, sitting on the edge of his bed, he looked at his own life the way someone looks at an empty house after moving out. Everything echoed. He didn't have the courage to admit that to anyone, least of all to God. But the truth, the one nobody says out loud, is that there comes a point in adulthood when pain stops being an accident and becomes a habit. And Michael had been living like that for years. It was as if he'd learned how to function while broken, without complaint. Used to silence, used to swallowing frustration, used to smiling at work and falling apart in the car in the parking lot. A quiet routine, the kind only people over 40 truly understand. A life that tightens from the inside without making a sound. He hadn't planned on praying that night. He didn't even have the strength. The truth was, he had spent months avoiding any conversation with God. It was easier to work late, to watch TV until he fell asleep, to distract his mind until everything went numb. But for some reason, a reason he would only understand much later, a sentence slipped into his mind like a whisper. "Talk to me the way you really are." Michael blinked. The phrase sounded familiar, like it had come from somewhere very old inside him. He didn't know if it was his conscience, his memory, his faith trying to breathe again, but it shook something in him. It didn't feel like a random thought. It wasn't an idea. It was a call. He tried to ignore it, shifted in bed, rubbed his face with both hands, took a deep breath, the kind you take when you're trying to push away an inconvenient memory, but the phrase returned, persistent, deep, almost steady. "Talk to me the way you really are." And right then, in that small, intimate, almost invisible moment, something began. Not a cinematic miracle, not a heavenly vision, but a real movement, a secret one, the kind that only happens when a tired adult finally stops lying to themselves. A small crack in the chest, something hard to explain but impossible to ignore. Michael felt his whole body get heavier, his shoulders always tense, his jaw clenched, his heart racing for no reason. Everything in him seemed to be shouting for rest, but not the shallow kind. It wasn't sleep he lacked. It was truth. For a moment, he thought about getting up, making coffee, turning on the TV, anything to escape that call. But he couldn't. His legs didn't respond. His body understood something his mind couldn't yet process. Something deeper than consciousness was telling him to stay. So he stayed. The digital clock by the bed read 2:14 a.m. The house was quiet, but not a comforting quiet. It was the kind of quiet that amplifies your thoughts, that forces you to hear what you avoid all day long. A cold wind hit the window, and the orange streetlight glow, the kind you see in small American towns, slipped into the room. Michael took a deep breath. His chest ached. His pride ached even more. Finally, without lifting his head, he whispered, "God, I don't know who I am anymore." The words dropped into the room like a weight, like a glass cup shattering on the floor. Michael felt ashamed. But he also felt something he didn't expect: relief. He realized it had been years since he had said anything true in prayer. He was always trying to sound strong, mature, responsible, always trying to show God the polished version of himself, a version that never really existed. Now, there was no pretending, just the raw truth. "I don't know who I am anymore," he said again, this time in an even softer whisper. And suddenly, the tears he thought he no longer had started to fall. Not dramatic tears, but quiet ones. The kind that come when your body sees no other choice but to release what's been trapped for years. He hadn't cried like that since his father's funeral when he was 26. That was the first crack, the first opening. The first moment when his soul, exhausted from carrying made-up versions of himself, finally admitted it was wounded. And without realizing it, without planning it, without even meaning to, he had just prayed the most honest prayer of his life, the kind that doesn't begin with pretty words, but with the truth we spend decades trying to hide even from God. For a few seconds, Michael stayed there, breathing like someone trying to relearn how to exist. Each breath pulled a little more weight out of his chest. He had no answers, no direction, no certainty. But for the first time in a long time, he had something that felt real. A crack, a beginning, a sincere plea. And even though he didn't know it yet, God always starts right there.
The house was still wrapped in that heavy quiet when he got up from the couch. The clock on the wall read 3:21 a.m., but time didn't seem to follow any logic anymore. Something was different. Not around him, but inside him. As if a small crack had opened on the surface of his soul, letting something finally breathe. He walked slowly down the hallway, not because he was afraid, but because for the first time in years it felt like every step actually meant something. It was strange to notice that. In his mid-40s, with a life that looked stable from the outside, he still carried a kind of emptiness he had never admitted out loud. Not to God, not even to himself. He reached the kitchen. The fridge light filled the room when he opened the door to grab a glass of water. The cold glow revealed details he usually overlooked during the day. The marks on the cabinets, the pile of mail on the counter, his favorite mug abandoned next to the sink. His whole life was there, silent, overly organized, and deeply neglected. He rested both hands on the stainless steel sink and let his head hang forward. The exhaustion seemed to rise from somewhere deep in his body, as if every sleepless night, every prayer avoided, every unresolved internal conversation was finally asking to be paid. For a moment, he wished he could just crawl back into bed and pretend none of this was happening, but something inside him wouldn't let him. The same presence that had woken him now seemed to be waiting, patient, steady, almost stubborn. He couldn't explain how, but he knew he wasn't alone. The water in the glass trembled slightly between his fingers, not from the cold, but from the tension inside him. He felt exposed, as if he were standing in front of a door he'd avoided opening for years, because he knew what was on the other side, his own truth. A quiet whisper crossed his mind, soft but non-negotiable. "Go back to where you seek me." The sentence disarmed him completely. Before he even realized it, his feet were moving toward the place that had once been his refuge, or at least he'd tried to make it one. The guest room he had turned years ago into a space where he claimed to pray, but hadn't stepped into for a long time. The door was slightly open. He pushed it gently. The smell was familiar. Old books, wood, that faint winter scent the house carried in the early hours of the morning. The small blue armchair was in the same spot. the Bible on the side table, left open and covered in dust, a perfect metaphor for his spiritual life. He sighed when he saw it, not because of the Bible's condition, but because of his own. He sat in the armchair and closed his eyes. The silence was so deep he could almost hear his heartbeat. For the first time in a long time, he realized just how far he had drifted. Not from God, but from the version of himself that still believed, still sought, still hoped. He didn't know where to begin, didn't know which words to use, but he sensed that maybe God wasn't waiting for eloquence. He was waiting for surrender. He took a slow breath. I don't know what you want to tell me tonight, but I know I didn't wake up for nothing. I know you brought me here. So show me. Confront me. Call me by name. I don't want to ignore you anymore. The air seemed to shift, not dramatically, but subtly, as if the room had become denser, more alive. He opened his eyes and noticed something that made his throat tighten. The sense of presence was too real to be imagination. It wasn't a vision, it wasn't an audible voice. It was something more intimate, deeper, untransferable, a spiritual impression settling inside him like a truth he couldn't deny. And it said, "You're not here because you woke up. You're here because I brought you." His breath faltered. The sentence didn't come from outside, it came from within. From a place so deep, no personal lie could reach it. And that unsettled him more than anything. He ran his hands over his face, trying to figure out if this was emotion, exhaustion, or revelation. But the more he tried to analyze it, the more he realized something he had avoided his whole life. God didn't need permission to touch his conscience. He closed his eyes again, now with a different weight, a weight of responsibility. Because deep down he knew God was about to press into places he had kept locked for years. The childhood he always pretended to be over. The mistakes he never confessed. The fears he renamed as caution. The losses he rationalized until they felt normal. The dreams he buried too early. The sins he rationalized until they felt normal. All of it seemed to rise before him as if his own spirit was being held up to a mirror that refused to distort anything. He tried to pray the way he used to, but the words wouldn't form. So almost without thinking, he began to speak in the most honest way he had spoken to God in years. I don't know where to start, because I don't want to tell you only what sounds nice. I want to tell you what's true. So here it is. I'm tired. I'm lost in places no one knows about. I've become a version of myself I barely recognize. I've gotten used to your absence in my routine, and I'm scared to admit how much that changed me. The words came out as if they had been trapped for decades. They weren't fast, they weren't eloquent, but they were real, and that seemed to be enough for something in the spiritual atmosphere to shift. He felt his chest loosen. A kind of pain that didn't hurt, it cleansed. A pain that revealed where he had hardened. A pain that exposed the places where his soul was begging for restoration. And then something strange happened. He realized he was crying, but it wasn't pure sadness. It felt more like some sort of inner realignment, something that needed to break so something new could begin. He wiped the tears quickly, embarrassed, as if God wouldn't notice. But a second phrase, just as clear as the first, crossed his mind with the force of an invitation. You don't have to be strong here. He took a deep breath. This time he let the tears fall. He didn't fight them because he understood this wasn't a night to prove strength. It was a night to recover honesty. And then, for the first time in a long time, he prayed without any mask. Lord, show me who I've become. Show me what I've avoided. Show me what still needs to be healed, even if I'd rather pretend it doesn't hurt anymore. A deep silence followed the prayer, but it wasn't empty. It was a silence full of answers, full of preparation, full of expectation. It was the kind of silence that comes right before a revelation. And he felt it, in his body, in his soul, in his spirit, that God was about to respond. In the next chapter of that early morning encounter, truth was coming. Healing was coming. And that man, sitting alone in the dim light, knew nothing would be the same after this night.
Dawn hadn't arrived yet, but something inside him already had. It wasn't relief. It was a sharp kind of clarity that only shows up when God decides to wipe the dust off a person's conscience. The kind of clarity that doesn't ask for permission. It simply enters, lights everything up, and exposes what's been hiding. He stayed seated in the armchair for several long minutes without moving a single muscle. The air felt different, as if the atmosphere itself had become heavier, fuller, carrying a weight of meaning he couldn't ignore. Something was about to unfold, and he knew there would be no going back afterward. He swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and waited. Because some answers only surface when you stop talking. A thought crossed his mind with such intensity that he nearly shrank back. Now I'm going to show you what you've been avoiding. It wasn't accusation. It wasn't punishment. It was surgical precision. His whole body trembled, not out of fear, but anticipation. The memories started to rise, not as quick flashes, but as scenes he had shoved into the deepest drawers of his mind. Scenes he swore he had moved past. Scenes he carefully rewrote over the years just so he wouldn't have to face the truth tied to them. The first memory came softly, almost innocent. Him at 9 years old, sitting at the edge of the school baseball field, holding the brand new glove his dad had promised to use with him at practice that day. Promised, but didn't show up. He remembered the sun burning his cheeks, the kids running around, the coach calling his name and him shaking his head and saying it was fine, except it wasn't, and it had never been. The scene faded slowly, but left a bitter taste in his mouth. He swallowed the past like someone swallowing a stone. Another memory arrived, without knocking. His first job, early 20s. His boss praising his performance, coworkers saying he was promising, him smiling on the outside and doubting on the inside. The doubt was never about competence. It was about identity, about an inner emptiness he never recognized as spiritual. The wounds were being exposed one by one. He tried to take a deep breath, but it came out shaky. The heaviness grew. His body felt like it wanted to bolt, but something inside, something deeper, stayed still, as if saying, "Stay. You need to see this." Then came the hardest memory, the one he never labeled as a wound, just as life happening. The season when his marriage began to crack. He remembered the specific night, him getting home exhausted, her sitting on the couch with that expression he had learned to ignore. The conversation that never happened. The touch that never came. The silence that grew between them like a wall. He knew he wasn't innocent in that story, but he always blamed the fatigue, the routine, adulthood itself. He never admitted that he'd become absent, not because he lacked love, but because he was terrified of confronting his own emptiness. Terrified of being truly seen, terrified of not being enough. His stomach tightened. "Lord, please, go slowly," he whispered, voice unsteady. But the response came quickly, firm, without anesthetic. "I'm not reopening wounds. I'm showing you where you're still bleeding." The words hit him with surgical accuracy. It wasn't cruelty. It was severe mercy.
It was God dealing with the truth he had avoided for years. He ran both hands over his face, breathed deeply, tried to pull himself together. But the next memory arrived before he could. The worst one, the most shameful, the one buried under carefully crafted excuses. A specific moment when he made a decision he knew was wrong and chose it anyway. He remembered the night, the place, the words spoken, and the weight he carried for months afterward. He never confessed it, never asked for forgiveness. He simply moved on, at least on the outside. But inside he knew that choice had changed something in his soul in ways no one else could see. The tears returned without permission. He tried to stand from the armchair, but a quiet force held him there. Not a physical force, a spiritual conviction. And then, for the first time that entire night, he asked the question he had avoided his whole life. Lord, why are you showing me all this now? The answer didn't come in words, but in a feeling, deep, solid, undeniable. A truth he couldn't argue with, because you can't move forward while dragging what keeps pulling you back, and because I've never healed anything you refused to acknowledge. He squeezed his eyes shut. It hurt, deeply, but it was a pain that made sense. The pain of a soul being repositioned. This wasn't punishment, it was restoration, and real restoration hurts more than pretending everything's fine. He took a deep breath and let the tears come. He didn't hide them, didn't rationalize them, didn't try to be strong. He was too tired to hold up any mask, and in that place of complete vulnerability, with his heart open and his past laid bare, he finally spoke the most important words of that entire dawn. Lord, I need healing. I need forgiveness. I need redemption, and above all, I need to come back. The moment he said it, something shifted in the room. Not dramatically, not supernaturally, but deeply, as if the whole of heaven had leaned in just a little closer. The presence that had seemed to observe him now seemed to surround him. And for the first time since his teenage years, he felt something he thought he had lost forever: the lightness of being found by God. And he knew, with absolute irreversible certainty, from that moment on, his life was about to turn a page he had delayed for decades. And no part of him was prepared for what the next chapter would bring.
There was something different about that morning. It wasn't a visible miracle or some spectacular sign breaking through the sky, but the air felt charged with a kind of silence that didn't suffocate. It watched. Michael woke up before the alarm went off, which was rare for someone who'd been sleeping poorly for months. The sun hadn't fully crossed the horizon yet. A blue-gray streak lit up the bedroom window, and the world seemed suspended by a thread, as if waiting for him to make a decision. But it wasn't a practical decision. It was something else, deeper, more intimate, and far more difficult. He stayed in bed for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling that familiar pull in his stomach, the weight he'd been carrying for years. The weight of everything he'd been avoiding. The crumbling marriage, the growing distance from the teenage kids, the faith he'd lost somewhere along the way. But now, there was something more. The memory of what God had started whispering to him in the past few days. Talk to me the way you really are. He had, and now he had to deal with the echo of that. When he finally got out of bed, Michael felt tired, but not the kind of tired that asks for coffee or a nap. It was an existential heaviness, the kind that makes a man go through life functioning on the outside while dying on the inside. He walked to the kitchen, flipped on the warm light, and looked around, as if the room were a biography written in everyday objects. The table piled with overdue bills, the dishes from the night before still in the sink, the silence that no longer felt like silence, more like consequence. He felt a tightness in his chest, not physical pain, but that emotional pressure that comes right before an inevitable moment. Something you know you have to face, but push aside until the very last second. But it was useless. The truth God wakes up inside a man never goes back to sleep. As he made coffee, he realized he was avoiding looking at his phone. He didn't want to see a message from his wife, or worse, no message at all. They'd been living like roommates for far too long, talking only when necessary, arguing only when unavoidable, going to bed at different times. He wasn't innocent in that story. He knew that. The silence between them hadn't formed on its own. But admitting that scared him. He leaned against the counter, holding the warm mug with both hands, and let the question he'd been trying to bury finally rise to the surface. What does God want me to do now? There was no immediate answer, no mystical feeling, no audible words, but there was discomfort, and deep down he knew exactly what that discomfort meant. He would have to tell the truth. To God, yes, but also to himself and to his wife. The thought made his shoulders tense. 10 years ago, he would have faced any challenge with confidence. But now, almost 50, he felt like he didn't have the emotional strength for conflict anymore. He wanted peace, even if it was a false peace. But God doesn't work with illusions. Suddenly, a memory hit him. Something his father, a simple and straightforward man, once said while teaching teenage Michael how to fix the car engine. Son, what you refuse to face eventually rots. Michael shut his eyes. His throat tightened. He didn't want to admit that the line applied to his entire life. When he opened his eyes again, he noticed his hands were trembling. Not from fear, but because reality had finally caught up. God was pushing him towards something he'd been avoiding for years. He needed to talk to his wife. Not about trivial issues, not about the marriage as a concept, but about the truth he'd been hiding from her and from himself. That scared him more than anything since all this had begun. At the office later that day, Michael could barely focus. Every task felt repetitive, automatic, empty. He stared at the computer screen, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. On the drive back home, the 5 minutes he spent sitting in his car in the garage felt like an eternity. He didn't want to get out, didn't want to open the door, didn't want to begin what he knew would be one of the hardest moments of his life. But something nudged him. Not a voice, not a vision, but a quiet conviction. The same one that began at the edge of his bed days earlier. He opened the door. The living room was dim, lit only by the TV on mute. His wife sat on the couch with a blanket over her legs. She looked up when he walked in, not with hostility, but with the kind of neutrality that shows up when two people stop seeing each other. "Hey," she said. "Hey." The silence stretched for a few heavy seconds. Michael took a breath. The truth needed to come out, and he knew it wouldn't come out pretty. "We need to talk." Her expression changed, not defensive, but tired, deeply tired, as if she knew this moment would come eventually, but had hoped it wouldn't be tonight. "About what?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Michael felt his throat tighten, but he spoke anyway. "About us. About me. About everything I never said." She straightened up on the couch. She waited, and for the first time in a long time, she was really listening. Michael swallowed hard. The words came out uneven, but they came. "I've been living half of myself, and you've been living half of you, and we're pretending that's a marriage. It's not. I pulled away, I pulled, I stopped trying, and I don't know how to come back unless I say this first." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of unspoken emotions, old wounds, and years of emotional distance. I couldn't find a name. She closed her eyes, pressed mercy. He walked closer, sat beside her, stayed quiet, and in that moment, something happened. Nothing visible, nothing dramatic, but something alive, something spiritual, something that only appears when truth finally stops being postponed. It wasn't reconciliation yet. It wasn't healing yet, but it was the first brick. And God was there in the middle of it all, silent, but present, waiting for the next step, the kind of step no adult takes without trembling, but every adult needs to take to find their way back to themselves. The house seemed to breathe differently that night. Not because anything extraordinary had happened, but because, for the first time in many years, there was truth moving inside those walls. Michael's conversation with his wife hadn't fixed everything, not even close, but it had cracked the oldest layer of ice in their lives. And cracked ice makes noise, internal noise, spiritual noise, the sound of life returning to what had been frozen. They didn't talk for long. There were no heated arguments, no accusations, no demands for detailed explanations. It was just truth, raw, uncomfortable, but honest. And honesty always shifts the atmosphere. After she went to bed, Michael stayed in the living room alone. But it wasn't exactly loneliness. It was another kind of presence, the kind that surrounds a grown adult in the exact moment he makes a decision he can never undo. He sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, and noticed his hands were trembling slightly. Not from fear, from awareness. Awareness is a hard territory, but it's the only place where God actually works. He rubbed his hands over his face, exhausted, yet something inside him was awake. A different kind of awakening than the one from the past few nights. This one had direction, purpose, a steady weight. For the first time in years, Michael felt the desire to pray without being pushed by pain. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't a plea. It was pursuit. He needed to know what God wanted from him now. He needed guidance. He needed courage for whatever was coming. He closed his eyes. Lord, I started. Now help me continue. There was no answer, but there was peace. And sometimes peace is the highest form of response. The next morning, while driving to work, Michael noticed something curious. The world looked the same, but he felt different inside it. The traffic was the same, the routines were the same, the worries too, but inside him there was a new steadiness, as if his soul had finally grown a spine. At a red light, his eyes fell on a small brick church with an old-fashioned sign out front. Sunday, service at 10 a.m. Topic, When God Corrects Your Path. He felt something hit his chest, a sense that the message wasn't a coincidence. Maybe it never had been. He looked away, unsettled, but something inside whispered, I'm speaking. You're listening. He didn't answer, but he knew. He knew it was for him. He knew God was opening a new door. He knew that if he ignored it, he'd fall straight back into the same old cycle. And he didn't want old cycles anymore. Not after what had begun on the edge of his bed. Not after what had finally come out of his mouth in front of his wife. Maybe it was time to go back. Not to empty religion or automatic rituals, but back to the place where God used to meet him before life hardened him. Sunday at 10, he whispered, as if saving it not just in memory, but in his heart. When he arrived at work, everything looked the same, but something was out of place inside him, like his eyes had become more sensitive to fakery, to hurry, to masks, including the ones he had been wearing for years. Watching his coworkers talk, laugh, and complain about the same things as always, Michael realized something uncomfortable. He was exactly like that. Until yesterday. He spent his days hiding pain behind sarcasm, hiding fear behind work, hiding lack of faith behind practical skepticism. But today, no. Today, pretending was impossible. In the afternoon, while staring at a report, something caught him off guard. A sudden urge to cry, not from sadness, but from relief, as if an internal weight was being rearranged by invisible hands. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a few seconds, and let the feeling happen. When he opened them, the first thought that surfaced was, "I'm not alone." And that sentence, for an exhausted adult, is worth more than any promise of instant improvement. That night, when he got home, he found his wife in the kitchen. She was chopping vegetables like she did almost every day, but something in her face was different. Softer. Not full peace, not complete resolution, but softer. Something had shifted in her, too. She looked up. "Can we keep talking after dinner?" Michael felt his stomach freeze for a moment, but then something else came. Courage. "Of course," he said, and he meant it. Over dinner, they talked about light things. Afterwards, she asked him to meet her in the living room. He sat on the same couch as the night before. She took a breath, gathering her thoughts. "You said yesterday that God is calling you back. What does that mean for us?" Michael took a few seconds before answering. He didn't want to lie, didn't want to promise what he couldn't fulfill. "It means I want to rebuild, but not just for us, because I know that if I keep living away from God, I'll always end up drifting from you too." She didn't say anything, but her eyes did. That was what she needed to hear. Not perfection, not polished answers, just truth, just real intent. After a few moments, she said, "I got lost too, Michael." He swallowed hard. It hit him deep. "I know," he replied, "but maybe we can find our way back together." Her tears returned. So did his. And this time he didn't hide them. They stayed there without reopening old wounds, without debating who failed first, without trying to fix an entire life in one night, just sharing the first spark of a new beginning. And new beginnings are rarely loud. They're quiet, deep, and they start when two people finally stop lying to each other and to themselves. Before bed, Michael went to the bedroom, turned off the lights, and sat on the edge of the mattress. There was a good weight inside him. The weight of spoken truth, of used courage, of steps taken. He looked at the window, where the moon lit a corner of the room, and felt that same silent presence again. This time, he didn't pretend it wasn't happening. "Lord, I started. I took the first step. Now, lead the rest of the way. I can't go back to who I was." And there, in that simple room, in that ordinary house, in that silence he knew so well, Michael realized something that would change everything. The greatest miracle wasn't God answering. It was him finally being ready to listen. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in many years, he was finally on the right path.